Hello everyone, welcome back to alkaline hydroxide 784. Today we'll be looking at something that is definitely talked about in your GP class. Think of NAC, think of the drilling of STEM in your heads, think of the recent Yale NUS closure. Okay, actually that's not entirely relevant, but okay, sure. And of course, you would say that we are looking at the loggerheads between arts and science. Unfortunately, the Yale NUS is more of liberal arts, which is like humans. But I'm not going to really be talking about that today. Anyway, so which will prevail, or should one prevail to begin with? Or if you wanted the artistic representation of this, here you go. Anyways, what we'll be seeing today is we're going to be comparing certain factors in which art or science could be either equally the same or one or the other, like which one is better for you in a sense. Yeah, you can just look at the content list, the the timings. Yeah, okay, so let's start. First up we have the usual consensus, your public opinion, at least here in Singapore and maybe in some other Asian nations, and that is the view that science is king. STEM gives jobs and art gives not even enough money to do the art. Well, the environment here doesn't really help with debunking that, as we have a lot more focus on science and scientific research and also technology and all that stuff. Meanwhile, for the art scene, well, we do have it, but it's hard to get funding. But unless you want to be, if you want to be expressive, it's really hard to get funding because you need to be more sanitized than even being on YouTube. So here we go. But despite all of that, if you're willing to be sanitized or you're willing to go to another country, or maybe if you want to be in YouTube, YouTube is also a place for doing art. Yeah. Or if you go to somewhere like Twitch, or if you prefer more mature content, there are places for that too. Things like that. You could probably get money from an art career. So yeah, but actually to me personally, what I would think is the most stable career in terms of art would actually be being an instructor, because you have a constant income from students. Of course, this is regarding the COVID situation, that also has some problems with regards to this particular job, but in normal times it is a pretty stable job, right? So that's one option. Or the other kind of stable job is to be in the media, even though MediaCorp makes some pretty not very exciting stuff. Or if you could be like a big name actor or musician and get all the sponsorship money. But yeah, it's still pretty hard for a lot of people in the art industry to keep up unless they work really hard or they pursue mature content. Okay, just kidding. So why do we still have people going for these art careers then? Well, art can be a fulfilling career in other ways. So, what determines a good or fulfilling career can firstly be linked to your interest or purpose in life. If you're like me and you want to do research in the medical engineering field and help people, then of course a science part is for you. But if you really feel that you would put more attention and effort and be more useful in the art sense by doing art to bring out a message, then of course art is for you. But what about if you like both? Just because, for example, I'm basically a science person. I don't know, Indian people like to use the word basically a lot, but okay. It doesn't mean that I cannot like art, like I'm one of those people who pursue science as my main thing, and I like arts, and I actually do some sort of art as a side thing, aka as hobbies. Or you can also do art as in order to communicate science, or other kinds of things. And there are also certain jobs which are kind of both science and art at the same time. Like for example, if you like CAD, if you know the computer assisted designing, or if you're doing like those models of objects in a 3D sense, it's kind of art in a way. It's both science and art skills. And it's also one of my favorite things, so I think that makes sense. And vice versa, you could be an art person but still use science or technology in your art. So maybe you like to use AI or some sort of code to draw your art. Or you could actually be like the person who is helping to draw the art for your for those science textbooks or whatever it is. And you could be just be interested in science happenings through YouTube videos or the news. Or maybe you're like one of those people who's very into colors and finds the Indian blue very interesting. I'm pretty sure it would have delighted some of you. So what is the point of this point? Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether it is art or science because they can both be fulfilling in terms of interest. If you do the job that matches your interest or purpose in life, you're doing it good. Yeah, that's with regards to interest, there is no real prevailing one. It is based on the individual. So the next point is on expression. So art and science are useful for two different types of expression. So art would be considered useful for the human and more creative expression of ideas and has more liberty to on the factuality of ideas and the details. Hence, art is oftentimes used for expressing opinions and perspectives or creative interpretations of scientific ideas or actual objects. So let's say you're looking at a flower, that's the actual flower. But when you paint the flower, you're doing an artistic representation of the flower, which is not the actual flower, it's a representation. On the other hand, science is useful for factual, detailed expression of ideas and has to be self-correcting to ensure that the idea is up to date and correct. Scientific expression is used in stuff like journals and papers, graphs and tables, technical drawings, and imaging or collection of data. So, in this sense, both of them are needed. Like they both kinds of expression are required. Because let's say if you only had scientific expression, not everyone will understand it. You need to be technically aware of, the terms or the actual topic in order to fully understand it. But once you translate the scientific thing using an artistic method of expression, a lot more people can understand it because it's visually appealing. And vice versa, there are some things that you just can't express with scientific communication. You need to use art to express your opinions, or like even writing can be considered an art. Like you write out your opinions in a expressive way that will get more impact compared to just writing it out facts and all. Yeah. So that's the second point. Actually, this is technically like the third point because the very first point was actually about money related kind of thing. And generally in Singapore, money is better gotten through science, although it might be possible to do it through an art job. Yeah. Anyway, so the next point is the usefulness to the public. So, this is where some people might say, well, if you do science, you actually make something that's useful. Well, but art is just like, for looking at or for watching or listening and things like that. So, according to that logic, people would say that science is more useful. Well, I guess you can definitely list out ways that science is useful, like medicine, engineering, technology, etc., etc., your smartphone, all those things, public transport, a lot of things. And ways that art may not seem so useful, because you just have like a painting hanging in a gallery. What are you gonna do with that? It's like aesthetic sake. But let me reverse this and tell you ways in which science can be not so useful and ways in which art can be quite useful. So science being not so useful, is that possible? Well, you can say things that are redundant or actually destructive. For example, in weapons, like not inventing weapons to begin with is better than inventing new ones every year just to one up your opponents. And you could say the idea of planned obsolescence or bringing out new features on every new phone is not useful at all, except for the company's banks, as it encourages consumerism and wastage. And you can also say things that have bark but no bite, at least for now. Like, for example, we have been promised stuff like fusion and fully self-driven cars or even solar or fuel cars, alternate fuel cars, that's what I meant. And all sorts of new technology that they keep claiming that it will come in the next 5 to 10 years, but they do that for the next 50 years. So when is it coming? In that sense, they don't really have as much use as of now, and it ends up sowing like false hope in some people, and makes some people think, oh yes, I'm gonna wait for this to come. And they just keep waiting and waiting, and nothing happens. Yeah, so that is where science may not be so useful. It is maybe a bit useful, but not very useful. On the other hand, we can also state the ways that art can be useful. Well, apart from talking about scientific uses of art, such as illustrations that facilitate visual learning in a textbook or on YouTube or anywhere else, and art therapy. Of course, art can be used to express emotion and make yourself feel better. Art is also useful in a humanitarian sense. It is effective at bringing up opinions and messages in a clear and strong manner if done well. This can, be like a call to action for people or something like that. So art is also useful in connecting communities and people. This can be through shared experiences or relatability, and can also be through culture, which keeps communities together and helping each other. Because when we want to be with other people, the first thing that usually comes to my mind is familiarity. So when you have a culture, which is something that everyone shares, it is kind of familiarity in a sense, and everyone feels more inclined to help each other within that same culture. So, yeah, so the other thing that you can talk about is that art can influence our emotions and evoke our empathy. Because sometimes, if you just see it as it is, it might be hard to understand what's going on. But the colors or the movements that are involved in art can be, or even music for that matter, can be used to evoke certain emotions and make us understand what is going on. We can improve our empathy by looking at art or listening to art or any kind of art basically. And yeah, we could actually have a whole episode about talking about art and stuff like that. And there is an episode which is called episode 22, the value of art. Yeah, so if you wanna see more about the value of art, you can look at that. So what's the conclusion? Well, you can say that both science and art have been usefulness and also spaces in which are not so useful. So as you can see, okay, so like that is in a sense both of them are useful. Like they're equally meaningful in the sense, yeah. So if you look at all of the points that I've been talking about so far, you'd be like, okay, so your main line of argument seems to be that both are important. There's no like real one wins over the other, except maybe in the sense of salary wise or getting money. Yeah, so that's the case. But we can actually go one step further and say that both are necessary for each other. In fact, you need science to help art and art to help science. Confused? Good, let's go. Right, so as a student in Singapore, you would have definitely heard of STEM, meaning science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All the things that I'm into. Ah. Yeah, so in fact, I was inspired to pursue biomedical engineering after hearing a STEM talk from Professor Jackie Ng. And she gave it when I was in RGS. And she did that like 2 consecutive years. So, yeah. But that's beside the point. The point is that many schools have similar emphasis or like, days or specific talks to intro people into STEM. And don't get me wrong, we do have culture days and arts education and stuff like that in RGS too. But I guess that might differ for other schools. It's more of those generic racial harmony day kind of stuff or like festival based days. But I'm not sure how much art based events there are in schools in general. But there's it can always make the STEM itself more inclusive for our art lovers. You want to know how? Right, so let me introduce to you STEAM. Yes, this is actually kind of a legit thing, like a legit acronym. It is not something that I came up with, okay? But yeah, it's the addition of A for art in the core of something to make 100 degrees water. If you didn't get that pun, I'm sorry, also not sorry. But anyways, why can't we emphasize art along with the sciencey stuff? We can tell how art interplays in science or even how art on its own can have a good impact, like why is this not a thing yet? Why are we not looking at STEAM instead of STEM? Okay, so how do we actually do that? Like how do we show this? Like how can we explain that art and science can interplay? Let's do a little rapid fire here. The first point, as mentioned earlier, art is used to communicate science visually. How else are you going to be excited about science if not for those colorful and detailed drawings? Yeah, and It's all the more important in the era of beautifully edited YouTube videos and of course 3D models. Cat again, anyone. It also helps in simulations as a visual representation goes a long way in how we understand our simulations. Secondly, art can be used in therapy and mental stimulation. You definitely heard of the benefit of listening to music while studying or doing work, as I was when typing the script, or even doing exercise. And art therapy exists for a reason. It allows people to express their emotions in fluid and creative ways without feeling constrained by rigid boundaries. Thirdly, now look at science. So science can be used to aid artistic creation. The simplest example is the materials itself, like canvases and paints and protection giving things, because we keep improving them every year so that our art can last longer and our art can be of better quality. And also things like resins and glues, if you know what I'm talking about, like you can use epoxy resin or even UV resin to make art, like those little keychain things, and you need glue in order to connect things if you want to make a sculpture. So these things come about by science and help us give a medium for art creation. For more complex examples, you could talk about color theory and even digital art, in which all of the colors you could think of can be found. You don't need to buy paint anymore, you don't need to find a very specific color. You can just select it from a nice color wheel or that square thing and go ahead and draw something in your iPad. And GPU processing that helps with artistic creation in games. By the way, speaking of games, AI and computer algorithms definitely help with art. Actually, it's quite interesting to learn about those things because it's very interesting. And it's not just those weak, weird sites that, go around deep faking or mishmashing art and artwork, or those programs that can write EDM for you. It's also stuff like rendering software that aids with realistic models for games. Like for example, if you're going out, like if you have a person walking on the floor, you need to know where the shadow is going, and then you need to know how the light bouncing off that person interacts along with like with the other objects in the scene. Like maybe there's a random table there, how the light bounce on the person and the table together. That requires some coding. It helps a lot because it's a bit hard to visualize that completely. But by using code, you can make it really good looking and actually quite natural looking. And another thing was actually about doors. Like I saw a video about how it's really hard to engineer doors in a game. Like it's like one of the hardest things that they could do. Anyway, so this is all really cool stuff. And yeah, the fourth point is that science can inspire art. Steampunk, robots, techie stuff, but also nature-inspired buildings like the Sagrada Familia, which is absolutely cool. And it's another indication to the fact that I've definitely read quite a few Dan Brown books. Yeah, this features in one of them. So the fifth point is that science can help justify the presence of art. I mean, if we can tell that art therapy is useful, or if we can scientifically discuss how music or even other art is made, or how art invokes certain feelings, it helps art to survive. It gives them an argument for them to survive. So in a way, science and art are needed for each other. Great, that's wonderful. So before we end, let's look at one last question. In a crisis situation, should science be prioritized over art, or should we still keep art? Well, realistically, we usually see both dial down in crisis times. I mean, research takes up a lot of money. I mean, by research, I mean scientific research takes up a lot of money, and art is also something that's usually has certain luxury to it. If you doing painting and things like that, for dance, I don't think it's as much because you just need your body in order to dance. And for music as well, if like the most basic one is just singing a song, which doesn't really require too much equipment, but the further along you go, the more equipment you need. So they both will end up being dialed down in crisis time. And the problem is science usually gets more attention and priority. But I would say we still need some art to encourage the people and convey important information in a clear and understandable manner. For example, infographics. So if you apply this to COVID situation, even though a lot of people, kind of lost their income and revenue, especially those in the art career, they're still quite useful. Like if science can be useful for finding the vaccines and things like that, the art people can be useful for making useful infographics, or creating a video that is effective at getting people to get the vaccination, or to wear their mask, or to do safe distancing, or anything else for that matter. So the answer to the question is, well, both. You In a way, you would both have science being prioritized over art, and also at the same time still keep art. That's what would happen in a crisis. Yeah, so if you have any opinions on this particular thing, you can comment it below. Maybe that will make some interesting discussion. So that's the end of this whole thing. And to conclude, both are important, and in fact, both science and art are needed for each other to survive. So don't look down on art, okay? And at the same time, don't feel too worried about science being such a big thing, because art is also useful, and I think it will still continue to survive. Yeah, so I think what we would really require is more leeway for arts to survive and to do its thing, because having so much restrictions might be problematic in a sense. But at the same time, having a lot of restrictions can at the same time allow for more creativity, because you need to think of ways to work with the restrictions but still be interesting. So there's a two-sided way of looking at it. Yeah, so I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.